My name is Dorothea Vane, and I am going to tell you something that will unsettle the marrow inside your bones. Not because I want to disturb you. Lord knows I've had enough disturbance to last a dozen lifetimes. But because the truth has a weight to it, a kind of gravitational pull that no amount of silence can hold back forever. I've been holding this for 70 years. 70 years of early mornings and late evenings, of folding my hands over quilts and pretending that what happened to me on the night of February the 3rd, 1951, was nothing more than the fever dream of a woman who'd eaten too much salted pork before bed. But I am 95 years old. My nutteds are the shape of river stones. My hair is the white of old piano keys, and I have run out of reasons to be quiet. So listen carefully, because I am only going to say this once. I grew up in a town called Sutherly, tucked into the armpit of West Virginia, where the mountains pressed in so close that in winter you could watch the fog swallow the steeples whole. Sutherly was the kind of place that forgot itself every 10 years or so. New generation, new grievances, same red clay roads that bled rust into your boots after a rain. My father, Clement Vane, was a surveyor who smelled of turpentine and pipe tobacco. My mother, Osith, was the kind of woman who ironed her curtains and never raised her voice above a hymn. We were Presbyterians of the anxious variety, suspicious of joy, deeply familiar with endurance. I was 21 in the winter I died for the first time. I say for the first time because by my count, I have died twice. Once in 1951, when pneumonia caught me like a hawk catching a field mouse, all speed and no warning, and then again properly on a Tuesday morning in late October of last year, when my heart finally said, enough. And my daughter Renly found me in the garden with my cheek against the cold dirt and the last of the dahlias nodding their heads above me like they were paying respects. But it is the first death I want to speak about, the one nobody believed. The pneumonia came the way most catastrophes come in small towns, quietly, through the back door, disguised as an ordinary cold. I had been nursing my neighbor, Hetty Bork, who was 70 and lived alone in a house that smelled of rendered lard and lavender water. Hetty had lost 2 sons in the war and had no one left to bring her soup, so I brought her soup. And in return she gave me her illness, the way the very old sometimes give the very young things they no longer have use for. By the end of January, I was bedridden. By the 1st of February, the doctor, a wiry, impatient man named Pruitt, had told my mother in the hallway outside my room that I might not make it past the week. I heard him say it through the wall. I remember thinking, with a strange, almost offended clarity, I haven't finished the book I was reading. It was Dostoevsky. I was 2/3 through. On the night of February 3rd, something happened. I won't dress it up with the language of visions or hallucinations, because those words carry the lint of dismissal in their pockets. I will simply tell you what occurred, the way you describe a road you once traveled, the turns, the landmarks, the quality of light. I left my body. It wasn't violent. It wasn't even particularly dramatic. One moment I was lying in the iron bed with the crocheted coverlet and the hot water bottle that had gone cold. And the next I was simply somewhere else. Above myself, briefly, I could see the crown of my own head, my dark hair fanned out against the white pillow, my chest barely moving. And then I was moving through something that I can only describe as the inside of a sound. Not darkness, not light. Something that vibrated at the frequency of a cello string just after the bow lifts. And then I was somewhere that had no floor and no ceiling, only a quality of presence so dense it felt like standing inside a breathing thing. And he was there. Now, I know what you are already doing. You are arranging your skepticism like furniture in a room, getting comfortable, preparing to wait me out. I understand. I was a skeptical woman myself. I had read too much and traveled too little, which is a dangerous combination for the credulous. But I had come to my faith the long way around, through doubt and argument and years of wrestling, the way Jacob wrestled the angel, sweating and losing ground, but refusing to let go. So when I tell you what he looked like, I am not telling you what the paintings in my mother's Bible suggested he would look like. I am telling you what I saw. He was not the golden-haired figure of the Flemish masters. He was not the blue-eyed shepherd of the Sunday school cards. He was a man of such extraordinary darkness of skin that the light seemed to begin with him rather than reflect off him, as though the illumination in that place had its source somewhere inside his chest, radiating outward through brown skin, the color of the richest river silt, the kind of soil that grows everything, the kind of darkness that is not absence but abundance. His eyes were nearly black, deep-set, with the kind of steadiness that comes from having seen every human thing and chosen against all reasonable evidence to remain. He looked, if I am being precise about it, like the men I had grown up being taught to fear, like the men who were not allowed to eat at the lunch counters in Sutterley, like the men who stepped off the sidewalk when my father walked past. He looked like Ezra Galloway, who shined shoes on the corner of Marsh and Depot Street, and always tipped his hat to me, and whom I had been taught by my culture and my century to see as less. I cannot tell you the shame of that recognition. Even in death, even outside my body, beyond my breath, I felt it rise in me like floodwater, that shameful arithmetic my upbringing had installed in me without my consent. And he looked at me with those near black eyes, and he said something I was not prepared for. He did not speak in King James cadences. He did not thunder. His voice was quiet in the way that certainty is quiet. It doesn't need volume because it isn't asking for anything. He said, in a language my mind received rather than my ears, "You have been afraid of what I look like. You have called that fear propriety. You have called it tradition. You have called it the natural order. I am asking you to see what it cost. And then he showed me, not a vision exactly, more like a pressure behind the eyes, a sudden knowing, the way you sometimes wake from sleep and understand something you had no conscious reason to understand. He showed me what it cost, not in the abstract political way of history books, but in the specific, tender, ruinous way of individual lives. He showed me Ezra Galloway's mother, whose name was Corinthia, and who had lost a son to a county jail and a county judge and a jury of 12 men who would have recognized my father's name. He showed me a girl named Leontine Prudhomme, who had wanted to be a doctor and became a laundress instead, not because of any deficiency in her mind, but because of the architecture of a world that my silence had helped build and my compliance had helped maintain. He showed me the cost, and then he said something else, something that has rattled around inside me for 70 years like a stone in a tin cup, something I have never told another living person, because I was certain, absolutely certain, that they would use it wrong. The scandal, he said, is not what they did to them. The scandal is that you already knew it was wrong and called your knowing something else. I came back to my body at approximately 3 a.m. My mother was asleep in the chair by the window. The hot water bottle had gone cold again. The Dostoevsky was still face down on the nightstand. I wept for 6 hours. My mother thought it was the fever breaking. It was not the fever breaking. I recovered over the following 3 weeks, slowly, the way you put weight back on after a long illness, cautiously, as though your body isn't sure it deserves to take up space again. Pruitt came by twice, declared me a medical curiosity with the bewildered satisfaction of a man who does not enjoy being wrong, and charged my father $3 for the visits. I did not tell anyone what had happened to me, partly because it was 1951 in West Virginia, and the word vision in polite company carried the same social charge as the word asylum. Partly because I was 21 and female and the daughter of a Presbyterian surveyor, which meant that my inner life was presumed decorative rather than substantive. And partly, mostly, because I understood in the deep animal way you understand things that have permanently changed your shape, that the experience wasn't a gift to be admired, it was an instruction. And instructions require action, not narration. So I acted, quietly, the way women in that time and place learned to act, through the cracks in the wall, through the small decisions no one was cataloging. I started buying shoes from Ezra Galloway, not because I needed shoes, but because I needed to look at him directly, without flinching, and practice seeing what I had been taught to unsee. He noticed the change in me. He never commented on it. He was a man of great dignity and greater economy of speech, and he simply shined my shoes with the same precision he brought to everything. And sometimes he hummed, and the humming was a kind of mercy. I taught school for 31 years in 3 different towns. I was not a revolutionary. I was not a martyr. I was a woman with a specific piece of knowledge and a very long time to work with it. I graded every paper as though it had been written by a child who might one day discover the cure for something, because I had learned, or been shown, that the difference between those who do and those who don't discover cures is rarely intelligence and almost always opportunity. I married a man named Sylvanus Kettrick, who was a geologist and a gentle person, and who died of a heart attack in 1987, clearing snow from the driveway, which seems like a strange ending for a man who spent his life studying the patience of stone. I had 2 children, Venley, who found me in the garden, and a son named Corvin, who lives in Portland and teaches philosophy and calls me every Sunday, which is more than most people get. I kept my secret, and it kept me. But here is the thing about secrets with theological weight. They age differently than ordinary secrets. Ordinary secrets decay. They become less potent over time, the way a wound becomes a scar, reduced to something you notice mostly when the weather changes. But a secret that carries the specific gravity of divine encounter does not decay. It accumulates. It grows rings, the way a tree grows rings, 1 year of silence pressed against the next, until by the time you are 90, and then 91, and then 92, the secret is no longer something you're carrying. It is something you are built around. I spent years working out the theology of what I had seen. I read everything I could find. The mystics, the liberation theologians, the historians of early Christianity, the scholars who pointed out with careful and well-footnoted patience that the historical Jesus of Nazareth was a first-century Galilean Jew of Middle Eastern origin, whose depiction as a Northern European emerged not from scripture, but from the specific political needs of specific eras of European art and empire. This was not, I came to understand, a fringe position. This was archaeology. This was pigment analysis. This was the careful, dispassionate work of people who cared more about accuracy than comfort. But knowing it intellectually and having seen it, those are not the same country. They share a border, but the interior landscapes are entirely different. What I saw was not an argument, it was a person, and what that person said to me was not comfort, it was confrontation. Delivered with love, yes. Delivered with a particular love that doesn't soften the truth to make it easier to swallow, but trusts you enough to hand it to you whole, but confrontation nonetheless. You already knew it was wrong and called your knowing something else. I have thought about the word scandal a great deal over these 70 years. In its original Greek, skandalon, it meant a trap, a stumbling block, something set in the path to cause a fall. The scandal he was naming was not I came to understand his appearance. His appearance was the revelation. The scandal was the stumbling block we had built out of it, the elaborate architecture of theology and tradition and social order that we had constructed specifically to avoid having to look at what he actually looked like and understand what that actually meant. Because if he looked like the people we had decided were less, if he had been born in the occupied territory to the working poor with the complexion and features of a people under the boot of empire, then every hierarchy we had built in his name was not just wrong, it was something worse than wrong. It was a deliberate inversion. It was taking the thing and remaking it into its opposite and calling the remake the original. That is a scandal. In the Greek sense, a trap set in the path, and most of us walked into it without ever knowing it was there, because we had been handed the map of the trap and told it was the map of the territory. The second time I died, the real time, the final time, was, as I mentioned, on a Tuesday in late October. I had been out in the garden because the last of the dahlias was still going, and I had a particular fondness for a variety called Bishop of Llandaff, which is a dark crimson red, almost black in certain lights, the color of old garnets, the color of things that have survived. I felt the pain in my chest, and I thought, with the same offended clarity I had felt at 21, I haven't finished what I was doing. Not a book this time, something harder to name. The particular and ongoing project of trying to be a person who sees clearly. I went down into the dirt, and the Bishop of Llandaff nodded above me, and I went somewhere again. He was there again. Of course he was. I don't know if I should tell you what he said this time. I have been thinking about it since Renly pulled me up off the cold ground and called the ambulance, and I found myself, improbably, still breathing, still here, still 95 years old, and running out of time to be quiet. I will tell you this much. He was not disappointed in me. He was not disappointed in the 70 years of small, quiet actions. The shoes bought from Ezra Galloway, the papers graded with full attention, the long interior argument with my own upbringing that I had been conducting without pause since the winter of 1951. But he reminded me of something. He said, and I am translating because what he speaks is not exactly English. It is more like the thing that English is trying to be. What you know is only useful if it moves. A seed buried and never planted is just a thing that was once alive. So here I am, 95 years old, writing this in the handwriting that has grown slower and larger with every decade, which my daughter will type up and which will go out into the world in whatever form the world receives things now. I am not naive about what will happen to this. I know some people will call it the ravings of a dying woman. I know some people will call it heresy. I know some people will call it precisely what they have always called inconvenient truth when it arrives in a package they did not order. But I am 95 years old, and I have run the numbers, and I have very little left to protect. What I want to say, what I have been building toward through all of this, through Setterly and Ezra Galloway and Sylvanus and the Bishop of Llandaff, and 70 years of Dostoevsky left face down on the nightstand, is this. The scandal is not theological. It is not, at its root, about whether one race or another was the face of God. The scandal is what we did with our knowing. The scandal is the gap between what we understood in the quiet places of ourselves and what we permitted in the loud places of the world. The scandal is that most of us who were handed power and permission and the comfortable theology of the dominant, most of us already knew. We knew when we watched a man step off a sidewalk. We knew when we graded a paper more harshly than it deserved. We knew when we crossed a street or clutched a purse or voted for the man who used fear as furniture. We knew, and we found other names for our knowing. He called that a scandal. I believe him. And I believe I have staked the back half of a very long life on this belief, that the first step out of the scandal is the step my own feet resisted for so many years, to simply look directly and without flinching at the person you were taught to unsee. To let that looking land somewhere inside you and rearrange something. To stop calling the rearrangement dangerous and start calling it what it actually is, a beginning. I am tired now in a way that has nothing to do with sleep. It is the tiredness of having carried something a long distance and finally setting it down in a place where someone else might find it useful. I think of Corvin calling on Sunday, and Renly, who knows my garden better than I do now, and the Bishop of Llandaff that will come back in the spring, whether I am there to see it or not, because that is what dahlias do. They return. They are stubborn about returning. They push back up through cold ground and bloom their dark crimson, almost black blooms, the color of garnets, the color of things that survive. I think of Ezra Galloway's humming. I never knew what song it was. I still don't. But I have been hearing it the last few nights, just at the edge of sleep, that quiet, precise melody, like a thing that was always there, just below the frequency I had been tuned to hear. I am 95 years old. I have died twice, and the most alive I have ever felt was the moment I finally looked, without flinching, at a truth I had always known and refused to call by its right name. If this story shook something loose in you, if you felt even a fraction of what I felt in that garden, then hit like, subscribe, and don't miss what comes next. What I still have left to say would fill another lifetime.